Hey, my name is Kevin. I go by the name Ambivalent. I also work under a few other names, also Amber, and I've been DJing for, I don't know, many years and making music for about 7 or 8 years now. Well, it's funny because I think my experience was a little bit sort of influenced by the time. It was like in the late 80s and early 90s. There was kind of a big, that was when a lot of things were happening with house and techno. But my experience came first through industrial and EBM, things like Nitzareb and Die Warzow and yeah, a lot of these bands that were kind of going in a different direction, like Front 242, things like this, that sort of crossed over a little bit into techno. I mean, it was all using the same machines, but the sound was a bit different. It was a bit more aggressive. And I had a friend when I was in school who, we were probably, I think, 17 years old. He would go and DJ at a club in the city where I grew up in Washington, D.C., and he would play in the room where they had industrial and goth and this stuff. And we would go to see him play. And then in the other big room, they were playing acid house and techno and house music. And we would always kind of jump between both places. And that was really my first exposure. I mean, this was probably 1991 or 92 that when I was hearing those records. And so it was interesting because I had reference points for both, but it all came from hearing it in the club. So I would hear things, records from Detroit and records from the UK, and I would only know them by the sound because none of my friends were buying these records. We weren't listening to them. We were listening to the stuff that my friend was playing in the other room, but I knew all of these records, like, you know, Plastic Man records. I knew them by the sound. And later, when I started to buy this music and get into it and start listening to it more closely, I recognized that I'd learned a lot of it earlier on. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's impossible to say. This is maybe the condition of being a DJ. Is that it's impossible to say that there's one favorite song. In a way, DJing is really about putting the right piece of music to the right moment. So in a way, I have a favorite song for every moment or a favorite song for every context. And I associate certain records with certain memories or certain feelings. And that becomes kind of the language for me of that stuff. So everything is associated to a different thing. So in a way, it would be almost like saying, do you have one favorite memory? And we all have maybe a few special ones, but I don't think anyone would have one favorite. That's a bad way of answering the question. I don't know, but it's a hard thing to answer. I think that in truth, it's actually the sound itself is sort of the main focus for me. In a lot of ways, the instruments that I use, the synthesizers and the drum machines and the mixers and the preamps and all of these things, the process is the inspiration. You know, like finding the sound, finding the groove, finding the elements, and finding the right mix of all of those things is the inspiration, and it is the influence. I mean, certain synthesizers have their own attitude, their own personality, and their own direction. And so when you work with them, they bring things out of you, and they kind of direct your ideas. And I think that is as big an influence as anything. But of course, I mean, you know, the question I think is more about like which things drove me to make music. And I think that, I mean, for sure, the music from Detroit that comes over many generations, but you know, the stuff that came the early moments in techno, and also the stuff that's come in the last 10 years as well from Detroit. For sure, I mean, the house music scene in New York City for a long time was like really, really rich and really strong, and the techno scene eventually in New York. New York really developed a different kind of techno scene from Detroit and other places, but the music in New York had a kind of an attitude and a style, a sort of a smooth way of going about things, but also kind of a rough edge, and that permeates through hip hop and house and also the techno that came out of New York in the last decades. That's a big influence for me as well. Do I listen to my own music? Not for pleasure. Maybe that's the best way of putting it. I can't quite relax and enjoy it as an outsider because I'm always seeing all the details. It's like sitting in your own house. You can see all the things that need to be cleaned or all the things that are missing. And it's a bit like being a bit inside my own head. And also when you make music, when you're recording it and producing it and writing it, you hear it the first time in your head, then you hear it when you write it, then you hear it again when you're arranging it, then you hear it again when you're mixing it, then you hear it again when you're finishing it and when you're mastering it, then when you're approving the master to go out. So by the time something has been released, I've heard it too much. So yeah, it kind of creates this nice way of just being finished with something also. Once you've heard it enough times, you sort of move on. But also I think when I first finish a piece of music, usually I try to play it in my DJ sets and test it, see how it sounds. And this is a really interesting moment where I really can hear it in the context of all the other music I'm playing. And that's, for me, that's the moment where I can decide whether something is finished or not. I use a lot of hardware now. I'm using several drum machines, and a lot of different synthesizers. The analog stuff gives me the ability to have kind of a more tactile relationship with the music. Yeah, and I think that the things that allow me to direct it more immediately, not pushing shapes around on a screen, but actually like touching things and moving them and adapting them and recording those moments, gives me a lot of freedom when I'm making stuff. And so a lot of my process is starting really rough with the machines, playing a bunch of things and recording as I go, so that if something happens, I capture it. And then if it changes, then I can also capture that change, and I can decide later which I feel like keeping. And then from there, it's a process of coloring and shaping the sounds, editing them, changing the timing of things so that it comes in the proper flow for a piece of music. Yeah, with techno, we have so many rules. You know, there's so many there's so many directions as to how a piece of music should be shaped, because it has to function for a DJ. It has to function for a dance floor. And when you break those rules, it can be really fun. And so it's always a matter of negotiating the shape of the piece of music. But to start, I try to start really free and be really free with finding what works with what happens here, what happens there, and then coming back and figuring out how to shape it in a way that is functional. I would say that the pressures that someone feels about trying to get to some place or some level quickly is the one thing that you should ignore the most. Don't listen to the ideas about first you have to do this, then you have to do that, and the next thing is this. And don't follow someone else's script. Just engage in the passion and do things because you love them, not because you think they will get a result. Because I think there is this pressure now to always be releasing lots of records and DJing all the time and always moving forward as if it's some kind of sport. Like, I think there's this attitude of competition that makes everyone feel like they have to be a creative athlete or something. And it's really not, it's not really meant to be this way. I think it's becoming, it's making it a business too soon. And I think if you do something purely for the joy of doing it, if you DJ simply because you love playing the music that you enjoy for people to hear, and if you make music simply because you love the process and the sound and the engagement with it, everything else will follow with time. It's about doing it because you love doing it, not because it will get you some result. Because the results are impossible to control. I mean, I would never expect that I would be here, and I never planned for it. I just did what I loved, and it got me to where I am. I'm doing some things with them. I'm doing some things with Mobile. I'm trying to really not have any limits. I think that the next step probably for me will at some point be to create my own channel, my own label, so that I can just have my music come out more directly. I think working with other labels is really cool. It gives a lot of freedom, but eventually it's important to have the direct relationship to the audience and be able to, you know, promote things that I believe in and make music that is really, or share music that's really I've only made personally for me, or isn't directed through someone else's channel, because then it can be more immediate also. I can make something and share it with people in 1 month or less. That's a nice feeling, so I think that's coming soon. No, if it's a secret, it will stay that way, yeah.
Okay then. Well, thank you very much.
Cool, thanks.